Today we're venturing deep into the heart of 5 true most disturbing Alaskan horror stories, where the land is as vast as its legends and just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed, get ready for Alaskan stories that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. I've driven 5 hours of empty road to get here. In Alaska, the dark feels older than memory. In Bethel, an elder warned me never to follow the lights that drift against the current, never to answer the river if it calls my name. Tonight, I'm opening 5 stories that should have stayed buried: a ranger's final tape, a fisherman's torn logbook, a cabin lease that renews itself, footprints that start in the middle of a frozen lake, and a name carved into a doorframe that no one remembers writing. This won't be loud. It will be slow. You'll hear boots on old boards, a window fogging from the outside, and the silence that lasts too long before the doorknob turns. If you stay, keep your name close. When the spruce begins to whisper, don't look back. We begin where the Kuskokwim bends and the water glows with no moon at all. I did not mean to stay past dark, but I never mean the things that matter most in my life. I was walking the old mining road above Hallow Ridge with a grocery sack, a lantern, and my uncle's stubborn promise rolling in my head like a loose marble. Leave the laurel alone after midnight. It grows toward voices. He said it last Thanksgiving, half a joke, half a warning, and I laughed because we were warm and fed, and the wind could not find us through the clapboard cracks. But I remembered it now because the lantern flame had a tight blue ring around it, which my grandmother called a sign of company. I had gone to check on the cabin that used to be my grandfather's. The roof sags, the porch leans, and the kitchen window blinks in wind. The way a tired eye blinks in conversation. I told myself I would sweep the leaves off, stack kindling by the wood box, leave beans and coffee inside for the next time I tried to live there. The road up was dry and the sky big. Owls worked the fields. A fox crossed in front of me, looked back once, and shook off the day like water. When I reached the cabin, it seemed smaller than I remembered, as if the hill had risen around it. I swept, I stacked. I put the groceries down on the table beside the photograph of my grandfather standing next to a truck, with our family name hand-painted on the door. When I turned to go, the clock over the stove ticked 2 minutes and then quit. I wound it and it quit again on the same minute, with the second hand pointing to my left toward the laurel. I held the lantern up and watched the glass sweat. There is a quiet that belongs only to laurel thickets. It is not a forest quiet. It is a woven quiet, a basket made of very old green. You can stand at the edge and hear your own breathing woven into it. You can speak your name and feel it push back like fabric. What I heard from the porch was not that quiet. It was a single step. Not heavy. Not light. A careful step placed to be polite, the way a child learns to climb stairs when someone is sleeping. Go on, I said. To no one. To whatever things with eyes watch from briars. I'm heading down. The lantern's blue ring did not leave, and the flame leaned toward the laurel like it was a draft, but there was no wind. I set the lantern on the rail and went down the 3 porch steps. The 3rd step creaked twice, once under me and once again with a delay, as if someone else put weight where my heel had been. I stopped. I stood still long enough for a moth to find the lantern and tap it twice like a small knuckle on a small door. Then I did what you do when you do not feel brave. I pretended I had dropped something and bent, slow to pick it up. The ground smelled like last year's leaves and old iron. The smell took me 15 years, back to the night my father showed me how to set a rabbit snare, to wait with my breath held and my teeth touching but not clenched. He said every sound has a shape inside it if you listen. He said some shapes belong to us and some do not. He said the difference matters. I could not tell the difference now. I could only hear that step again behind the laurel weave, like a polite hand testing the edge of a curtain. I straightened and told myself to walk. The old mining road always looks kind in lantern light, like a hallway down to a bedroom. I said I would make the first switchback before the lantern burned halfway down, and then the next, and by the 3rd I would see the flats and the rivers shine. I lifted the lantern and it gave a little stronger light for a second, the way a voice lifts when you remind it to. The first switchback was farther than I thought, or I walked slower than I meant to. Either is likely. The road narrowed as if the mountain was practicing patience. Every 15 steps I heard that single footfall in the laurel. It did not match me. It did not echo me. It placed itself gently into the space between my steps, as if it had been waiting for that space all along. I turned once and shone the lantern into the green, and the laurel leaves reflected my light back in 100 coins. Nothing moved, but something had already chosen where to stand. I told myself I was a grown man with lungs and legs and a road. I told myself I knew these hollers like blood knows a pulse. I told myself to count. Counting keeps you from hearing sometimes. I counted 27 breaths and stopped because breath number 28 caught at the top like a coat on a nail. I tasted metal. The lantern's blue ring thickened into a collar. "Uncle Ray," I said, because it is easier to ask a family name than to ask nothing. The laurel did not answer, and that was worse than a fox bark or a buck's snort or a stranger's hello. Silence in the mountains is not empty. It is a shape waiting to be chosen. I had chosen it. At the first switchback, the road tilted down to the left, to the slick place where the creek crosses in wet months. Tonight the creek hid under stones, keeping its breath for rain. I saw the flat place where the miners used to park their mules. I saw the stump where my grandfather sat to take off his boots. I saw my own boot prints from coming up, still crisp. The heel marked with the little square my father cut into my soles when I was a boy, so he could tell my tracks from my cousins. I saw a third set of prints, newer than mine and set into mine as if someone had stepped in each one and made it theirs. They were not bigger. They were not smaller. They were exact. I knelt and put the lantern close. The flame thinned under the glass. The blue ring fattened and pressed the sides. In the print I could see the square cut of my heel and the gravel I had pressed down, and the flour-fine dust I had thrown to the edges. Over it I could see the softer shape of a foot that had no heel and no cut and no edges at all. Not bare, not booted. The weight in that print was a held thing like a breath in a creek. I said my name, not my first name, the family name. I set it into the air to see how the air would carry it. The laurel's quiet closed over it with a faint stitch, the way a seam closes under a practiced hand. I knew then that I had given the quiet something it could use. I straightened and did not look toward the thicket again. At the second switchback, the night stretched. Time in the hills can skitter like a rabbit or lie down like a mule. This time it lay down. I walked until my calves ached and the lantern's collar of blue had a seam in it like a closed eye. And still the second switchback did not come. The road kept offering the next turn and then swallowing it unkind. The laurel on the downhill side leaned in as if to hear me think. I wanted to hum to myself, but my mother's hymns ran off the page. I whistled once without meaning to, a soft thing, a breath shape, and the entire thicket sighed as if relieved I had finally given it permission. A whippoorwill called low and close, then closer than that, then not like a bird at all, but like a voice trying to stay inside a bird. "Poor Will," it said once, and then it tried my name, and then it gave up on both and made a new sound I did not know how to carry in my head. I answered without meaning to, the way you answer your name when someone says it kind, and the lantern flame skipped. There is a place on that road where a rock ledge sweeps out of the hill and you have to duck to pass. My father called it the brow. My shoulders know the height of it better than my eyes. I ducked, put my hand on the cold rock because it is good to touch something that has no wish for you, and felt the scar where lightning split it in my father's youth. Cold granite, real as taxes. The laurel pressed close across from it, making a tunnel. I stepped into the tunnel and the sound changed. Not louder, not softer, just changed, as if the night had bitten a word in half. Footsteps, but not mine. Footsteps close but careful. Stepping onto each soft place I had just made, choosing the same path for a different reason. "Walk on," I said to myself now, and my voice did not carry the way a voice should. It felt short, like the flame under the blue ring. I came out of the tunnel and the road widened. The second switchback stood in front of me, obvious, ordinary, and I wanted to laugh and curse and sit down all at once. I turned because the road told me to, because the river and the valley and my little house pointed that way. When I turned, the night turned with me like a big dog changing sides, and the laurel behind me rustled one full leaf and then held still too hard. Something stepped into the road 10 paces behind me. Not heavy, not light, polite. The step did not want to scare me. The step wanted something else. I kept walking because anger is sometimes braver than fear. I kept my head straight. When you keep your head straight, you can see more with the corners of your eyes. I saw a patch of road that should have been dark and was not. A darker dark, a shape that accepted no light. The lantern did not touch it. The stars did not touch it. My name did not touch it. It was not a man. It was not an animal. It was the shape of a space I had once taken up and left behind. The third switchback would bring me to the flats. The third switchback would put me within shouting distance of the river. The third switchback is where men have lived when they were between houses, and where women have sat to cry when no one could bear to hear them, and where coyotes laugh because they do not have to pay for what they take. I counted 20 steps, then 30, then 50. The lantern glass fogged from the inside. The blue ring narrowed until I could not tell if the flame still burned. Footsteps placed themselves in the cradle of each step I made, always 10 paces behind, always polite enough to keep the distance. The wind came down off the ridge and smelled like cut apples and damp nails. That's a smell I know, autumn in the tool shed, my father's knuckles the night he taught me how to drive. I wanted to turn and put my lantern under that smell and say, "You are this, you are only this." I did not turn. I kept walking. Then from ahead, from where the switchback should be, a new sound. A huff like a big animal adjusting itself in sleep. A scrape, a lift, a soft pour. Shoveling, my grandfather would have said, and he would have meant it kindly. The hill ahead took a breath and held it. I stopped. The footsteps behind me did not. They came forward 3 paces, polite, then stopped where they had learned to stop. I waited for the hill to breathe out. It did not. My chest started to do its own work without me. I felt that stupid human panic to hurry a thing that cannot be hurried. I raised the lantern. The glass cleared for a moment and showed me the place where the road used to be. Something had laid the road down in a new direction, as if a hand big enough to move a porch had rearranged the valley's furniture while we were all sleeping. The track bent where it never had into laurel that had never been cut, around a stump that had never stood. I could see the old line in my head and I could see this new one in front of me, and both felt true, and that is a worse feeling than a lie. "Who are you walking?" I asked, because it is easier to ask a question for 2 than to ask for 1. The polite footsteps behind me did not answer. A second set began, offset by a heartbeat coming from the laurel to my right. Not polite, not unkind, familiar. The way my father's boots used to sound on our kitchen floor after the late shift. One heel heavier, one toe hesitant from an old nail he never took out. The hair lifted on my arms and I said his name out loud. The first name this time. The one only his mother used when he was in trouble. The laurel rustled and grew still like a mouth deciding whether to open. Then very close to my ear a voice shaped itself out of the woven quiet. It did not come through leaves. It did not come through air. It came through the shape of my body, the way a violin will speak if you lay your ear against the wood. "Don't turn, son," it said. My father never called me that when he was living. He said my name like a brother says another brother's name. Gruff equals sure. "Don't turn," the voice said again, and the polite footsteps behind me took a half step as if agreeing. I kept my eyes on the new road and I stepped into it. The laurel closed over the old line behind me with a sound like a seam finishing. We went, me, my lantern with its tired flame, the polite steps, the old boot steps, into green that had no right to be where it was. The leaves brushed my shoulders with a weight that learned me as it touched me. We rounded a curve that I would have sworn was never cut. We came out into a small, flat place with a view I have never had from that hill. A clear sight of the river's elbow and the church steeple on the far bank, and the single light in the parsonage that no one ever turns off. In that small, flat place, the footsteps stopped together, the polite ones and my father's old ones. I did not stop. I made myself cross to the far edge. I stood there looking at the river that has carried every name I know, and returned some of them burdened and some of them clean. The lantern went out without flicker. It just gave up. The blue ring held as if it kept a flame that was no longer there. The dark slid into my hand like a book I had carried too many times. The footsteps did not start again. The polite ones did not leave. The old ones did not come closer. They waited. I understood then that I had been allowed to lead, and now I had been allowed to arrive. And what happened next was not my choice alone. "Tell me what you want," I said, and my voice went out into the open instead of back into the laurel. The open did what open does. It carried the sound farther than it deserved to go. Somewhere down in the bottoms a dog answered once and then thought better of it. The church light did not change. The parsonage window did not change. The river slid a sleeve over a rock and did not notice me. The polite footsteps took one step to stand at my shoulder, close enough that I could feel the air they moved. The old boot steps came up on my other side, heel heavy, toe careful, and I knew how tall they both were without seeing. I knew how they would look without turning. I knew exactly how often I had loved both those shapes and how often I had run from them. I put my hands on the rail where no rail is, because sometimes you need to grip something to keep from being chosen. Behind us, deeper in the laurel, something else moved. Not footsteps, a slow drag like a heavy thing that does not want to wake the house. It came to the edge and would not come out. It waited the way a debt waits when you've already opened your billfold. The polite presence at my shoulder leaned the least little bit, as if listening for a word I did not know how to say. I do not know how long we stood like that. 3 figures facing the river with the night leaned into our backs. Time lay down again. The church light flickered once and did not go out. The parsonage window let a person move behind a curtain and then held still. My hand felt the imprint of a rail that does not exist. I could hear my heart, and I could hear another heart, and I could hear another, each of us slightly out of time with the others, like a hymn no one agrees on. All right, I said finally, because I have never known how to end anything. If it's me you want, say it plain. The polite presence at my shoulder stepped back 1 small step. The old boot presence stepped forward 1, heel heavy, toe careful. The thing in the laurel dragged itself a hand's width closer. The dark pressed my face the way a mother tests for fever. The rail that does not exist felt warm under my palm, as if another hand was holding it from the other side. And then, from down in the valley where the river turns and the graveyard fence leans, a bell rang once, no church bell, no dinner bell, just a single, wrong note from a metal that did not learn to sing. The polite presence turned its head toward it. The old boot presence did not. The laurel made a sound like teeth. The path that should go down to the flats did not show itself. The lantern in my hand, out and lightless, grew heavier, as if full of water. Something said my family name from inside the laurel, in a voice that knew how to borrow the sound of my own mouth. I kept my eyes on the river. I did not turn. And then, very gently, a hand I could not see took my empty lantern from me and raised it as if to light the way I had not chosen yet. People around here say Coffin Creek doesn't sing. It saves. It saves breath for winters that never quite end and for names that won't lie down. I used to roll my eyes at that, because water is water and a creek is just a road for it. That was before the night I followed a widow's lamp along that bank and learned how it held. Breath can pull a man across ground he thought he owned. I went because of a promise I made with my hand inside a dying woman's hand. It was last spring. The dogwood showing and the hills soft with that first green that looks like bruises healing. Mrs. Penley, everyone called her the widow, had not left her bed in months. She lived in a house so close to Coffin Creek the porch posts had moss on their backs. My mother sent me with soup and a stack of folded dish towels, because we're not the kind of family that lets a woman do the last miles alone if we can walk a few with her. The widow's eyes were hard to meet. Not because they were mean, because they were exact. She could count how many words you wasted, and she did not approve of waste. I put the soup on a spoon and she ate, slow as a clock learning to move again. She told me a story in pieces about the year the creek took her man. He got to listening, she said, and her tongue made the word sharper than teeth. Men die when they listen at the wrong time. She told me how the creek asked his given name 4 times and he answered 3. I am not telling you the 4th, she said, and her eyes watered not from sorrow but from contempt. For him, maybe, for the creek, maybe, for the whole business of living where water has ideas. When her hand slipped from mine at the end, she opened it again and pressed something into my palm. Keep this where it can see you, she said, and don't let the wick learn your name. It was a lamp, small and square and old, the kind with a tin reflector that turns one flame into a duty. The glass was rippled, the wick a dark tongue. I told her I'd keep it safe. You can't keep a thing safe, she said. You can only keep it company. She closed her eyes, and each breath after that had to be coaxed. I walked home with the lamp under my jacket. It warmed me through my shirt like another person's hand. I meant to hang it on my porch and pretend it was a good luck charm. But the days got busy with my own small failings, and the lamp lay on the kitchen shelf behind a jar of nails until summer came and went, and the sumac reddened. That's when the creek began to trouble me at night. I live a mile from it as the crow flies, more as a person walks. In the dark, with the window open because it was still too hot to sleep, I could hear its knot song. The rush with the held breath under it, as if the water were taking in air and refusing to let any go. It did not call my name. It did something worse. It remembered it without saying it out loud. My body would wake to the feeling of having been called. The houseboards would sigh. The clock would be wrong by the same minute it chose to be wrong. The lamp on the shelf would be warm as if someone had just set it down. On the first cold night, I gave up pretending I didn't notice. I filled the lamp with kerosene from a can I keep for storms. I trimmed the wick like I'd seen my grandfather do when he wanted steady light for a steady hand. I cleaned the glass with a cloth that had been a shirt I wore the day I put my father in the ground. I told myself I was doing a decent thing for the widow, keeping company with her old light in a season when heat hides. But as I carried the lit lamp to the porch, the creek's knot song lifted, and I knew who was keeping company with whom. The flame steadied into a low, stubborn burn. Light settled in the tin like a decision. The glass showed a ghost of everything it touched. Railing boots my jaw with its old family set. I sat with it until my eyes learned how to see again without screens. Off toward the bottoms, a dog barked at the kind of nothing that feels like something when you're tired. A single owl called and then thought better, and then the creek exhaled or pretended to. The held breath didn't leave. It just slid its weight a little, like someone turning over in sheets. I don't know why I took the lamp off the porch and started walking. Maybe because the flame looked too awake to leave alone. Maybe because the night felt like a question, and I wanted to answer it before it learned to ask my name out loud. The road to the creek is an old habit. My feet can find it because my people wore it into the dirt going to funerals and baptisms and back again. The fields lay under the moon like dogs that had been told to stay and meant it. When I stepped off the lane into the path down the hollow, the lamp showed me everything I didn't want to touch. Spider silk strung low between weeds, the coarse hair on a blackberry cane, the scrape on a fence post where a deer had sharpened the velvet off his antlers and left a surname of sap. Halfway down, I started hearing the second sound. Footsteps, I thought first, but not quite. Not the dull thud of boot on dirt. More like fingers drumming on the underside of a table, trying to make a point without speaking. I stopped and the drumming stopped. I went on and it kept pace behind and a little to my left, where a person would walk if they meant to be near without being seen. I felt foolish and then I felt angry. Anger is how a man makes fear do chores, and I lifted the lamp higher. The flame leaned forward and the blue ring I had learned to dread from other nights did not come. The edges of things were honest. The leaves looked like leaves. I breathed. The drumming slowed and I told myself it was seeds dropping from dried pods. I told myself it was a squirrel with no respect. I told myself I was a grown man going to look at water. At the footbridge, the lamp showed the creek's back, slick and black, shouldering against the stones. The sound under the rush, there it was, the kept breath, the inhale that did not end. It got into my mouth without my permission, and my next breath became the creek's. Drawn in and holding, as if every lung in the hollow had agreed to wait for a signal that never came. The bridge boards whispered a word in their old pine voices, wait. I put mine on them and crossed. On the far bank, a path threads along the water where boys go to smoke and men go to decide whether to drink, and women go to speak names without being interrupted. The lamp's light pushed back just enough of the dark to make the rest of it seem kind. Upstream, I saw a glow that wasn't mine. A second lamp hung from a low branch, the kind of cheap glass you buy at a yard sale because you trust things more when they've already lived. It swung gently though there was no wind, and with each swing it caught me and let me go. Caught me and let me go. I thought of the widow's exact eyes and her exact voice and the way her hand had warmed the lamp, as if telling it something I was not entitled to hear. Ma'am? I said, though I knew better. The word did a small thing that made my teeth hurt. It turned and came back a degree off true, not echo, not return. Just a shadow that hadn't learned where to stand. The hanging lamp burned steady. Under it, the creek was too dark. I made it to the branch and reached up and steadied the lamp with my hand. The glass was cold. The metal hook was warm, as if a person's thumb had just left it. There was a note tucked under the lamp's base, a scrap torn from the back of a church bulletin. The handwriting was neat in the way mountain women write when a girl and keep into their old age, so that everything else they do can be messy and no one will judge. If you see him, don't say his name. If you must say a name, say mine. It was signed in a line that broke halfway through, as if the pen had encountered a bump big enough to become trouble. Pen, and then the scratch of a nib that had to stop. I tucked the note into my pocket the way a child steals a peach. The drumming started again. Closer now, no use pretending it was seeds. I turned the lamp to face upstream. The reflector widened the light like a mouth. A shape stood in it where the creek should be reflecting stars. It was the size and patience of a man, not water, not rock, not tree. A person's silhouette all filled with night. I could not see a face. I could not see hands. But the place where shoulders would be had the set of a man carrying something heavy he has carried before. Don't say his name, I said to myself like a prayer I didn't understand. From the willows to my left, a woman's voice answered with the breath still held in it, like words spoken while you're swallowing water and trying not to cough. Don't say his, she said, and the correction cut my ear like a paper edge. Say mine, Penley, I whispered, and the shape in the creek tilted its head a fraction, the way a dog does when it hears a whistle it cannot locate. The lamp's flame did not waver. The blue ring did not come. I kept the lamp steady on the black shape and tried to keep my own shape steady around my bones. Coffin Creek is shallow in the spots where people cross. The shape stood where a person could stand if the water bent itself politely around their calves. But the water did not bend. It tangled where legs would be, puzzled by the problem of a body that would not accept current. The drumming changed, less like fingers, more like knuckles on a lid. 4 soft raps, 3, 2, the old family cadence, I answered without meaning to. The shape in the creek leaned toward me the smallest degree, as if the weight it carried had shifted interest. You are not him, the willow voice said. It had stopped being a widow's voice. It had become an all-widow's voice, the hiss of a dozen kitchens where women teach grief to move in tiny circles until it sits. But you will do if you listen. I'm listening, I said, and the creek's kept breath pulled at my lungs like thread. You think a lamp shows, she said, not unkind. Sometimes a lamp calls without meaning to. That one, I felt her look at the little square light in my hand, knows your face too well already, so if he tries your name, don't answer. He will ask the other one, the family one. He'll ask 3 times careful and the 4th time cruel. If you answer at all, answer with the name we wear when we're forgotten. What name is that? The willow leaves shook a little and the sound had opinions. Widow, she said with no sad on it at all. Say it for me and then say it for yourself. I stood there with the lamp and the shape in my mouth full of a word I didn't want. I have not been a husband long enough to be a widower. I have not been brave enough to be remembered with a title that keeps a house with no one in it. But the creek drew at my lungs again, and the shape in the water took 1 step and the light moved across nothing as if it were skin. Widow, I said. It fit wrong in my mouth like a borrowed tooth. I could hear my grandmother's laugh and my mother's sharp inhale and my father's old boots on a floor I did not own. The shape stopped, not offended, not appeased, just listening as if to a carriage clock in a room where someone is almost asleep. I said it again. Widow. The lamp's flame shortened to a bead as if embarrassed for me, and then drew itself up tall as if I had finally made it a promise it could understand. The shape turned its head, and I knew with that certainty that belongs to terror and to love, whose head it would be if it were a head, the man the creek took from the widow, the man who listened 3 times and would not tell of the 4th, the man whose boots dripped in her doorway until the leather unstitched itself. I knew the slope of his shoulders from photographs where he refused to smile. I knew the way he held his arms away from his sides as if making room for invisible packages. I knew the way he would smell, iron filings and molasses and the clean sour of a shirt that has worked hard and not had time to wash. He lifted 1 hand. The water did not say how. It made the motion a suggestion, and the suggestion made my skin warn me. Here comes a thing you already agreed to without knowing. The hand, if I can call it that, arranged itself into a shape my family understands, knuckles, a patient beat. 4 soft raps, I answered without thinking because a body knows its own door. 4, 3, 2, on the one he did not knock. He tapped the air under the lamp right where the wick disappears into the machine, and the flame leaned and the blue ring showed itself, thin as a vein. Widow, I said fast, as if speed were a kind of courage. The ring thinned. He tapped again. The flame trembled and crouched. I said it once more, and the creek stole the word the way it steals round stones, by taking all the corners off until there is nothing left to cut yourself on. The willow voice came from behind my ear now. Walk him, she said. Don't let him stand and count. Walk him like you would a calf you're teaching not to choke. Keep the lamp between you. Make him follow. He can't keep a foot in two places at once. He tried that when he was living. It didn't take. I stepped backwards along the narrow path with the lamp high and the reflector sending a quiet order across the water. The shape followed one careful pace at a time, polite as a mourner. Upstream, the hanging lamp swung a little wider. The path bent into a place where the bank lowered and the water widened for a family to wade in July. I felt the creek choose me, and hated how sweet that felt. I held the lamp higher. The drumming moved to my right in the sycamores and became footsteps, not mine. Not polite this time, purposeful. The kind a man makes when he is late and wants to pretend he is not. Widow, I said again. I said it to the water, to the shape, to myself. The flame steadied. The blue ring vanished. The shape kept my pace. Every time his outline crossed a star, the star winked out for a breath and then found itself again. We reached the ford. Stones lay under the skin of the water like vertebrae. I put my boot on the first. The lamp showed a ripple that wrote a sentence in a language my ancestors used when they were too tired to lie. I took the second stone, then the third, and the shape stayed in the deeper part where a man would be pulled, gently at first, then decisively. He did not bend with the drag. He did not turn his shoulder. He set himself like a post in a fence a boy keeps running into. The creek gathered itself like a choir about to find the right note. Widow, I said again, around the ache that had come into my teeth, and I reached the middle of the ford. The water touched my boot and then pulled back as if ashamed to know me. The lamp's flame did a violent little dance and then remembered its work. The shape lifted its internal head and the creek leaned toward it with what looked too much like affection. The drumming on my right became very loud and ended in an intake of breath big enough to be a storm. I did not turn. When I tell you that the voice that spoke my family name then did it in my father's mouth, you might think you understand what I felt. But my father never spoke it that way, rounded at the edges like a secret, softened like a bruise that wants to be touched. He barked it mostly, or he sang it when he was full of beer and the kind of happiness that comes from having fixed a thing that had no business being fixed. This voice used my father's mouth to make a new word from an old one, and the urge to answer was not just habit. It was a kind of gravity. I put my tongue behind my teeth and pressed until something hurt. Widow, I said, and it tasted like a key with no door. The shape paused as if listening for someone else to make up my mind. From the willows the woman's voice came again, closer than hair. Last time, she said, and I did not know if she meant last chance or last step or last name. Widow, I said, and the creek finally let the breath go. It did not roar. It did not leap. It opened the smallest part of itself and drew down in the shape with it, the way a mother lowers a baby into bathwater. Careful, sure, done 1,000 times, done once. The stars reflected again and did not wink out. The drumming stopped, and the silence that came after was not a woven basket. It was an empty bowl. I crossed to the far bank and put my feet on the dirt, and the lamp went suddenly heavy, as if full of river. I stood there and waited for my knees to remember their job. The willow leaves rattled dry. The hanging lamp upstream stilled. The creek sounded like a creek. I felt like a fool and like a liar and like a man who has done a small chore well enough to be given a larger one he does not want. Is that it? I asked, to no one, to anyone. From the path behind me, a step. Not polite, not purposeful, familiar. Heel heavy, toe careful. I did not need the lamp to tell me who had found the ford. Son. My father's mouth said again in a new way that made me wish for his old bark. The lamp's glass fogged from inside. The blue ring fattened like a vein remembering its work. The creek took another deeper breath, not keeping this time. Readying. Don't answer, the widow's voice said, and I could feel her hand on my shoulder, though she has been under clay for months. And I don't know if I mean her hand in life or her hand in the name she gave me. If you must speak, use me, use us. That's what we are for. I raised the lamp and faced the water because I couldn't bear to face the path. The flame leaned away from me as if ashamed of what it was about to see. Behind my back, the foot came down on the first stone with a slow forgiveness. My father never walked slow. He walked slow now. The creek opened its mouth. Widow, I said, but this time the word was not a key. This time it turned in the lock and something on the other side turned with it. When I was a boy, men on porches told me Brown Mountain borrows light the way a hard winter borrows food. Takes what it needs and returns only what won't keep. They meant lanterns that burned out early, campfires that never warmed the hands that made them, headlamps gone to a dull coin at the worst bend. I thought it was a pretty saying until the night I learned what the mountain prefers to borrow is not flame, but the part of light that makes a face into a person. I went up there because my aunt asked the kind of favor you can't refuse without breaking the spine of a family. Her husband, my Uncle Ray, had not come back from setting bear cameras. He went late, which he swore by. Everything honest happens after 9, he'd say, twitching a smile he meant to be harmless. He took 3 trail cameras, 2 sandwiches, and the good headlamp. He left his truck where the gravel shoulder peters out into broken glass and pine needles in the long patience of a ditch. Back by midnight, he told my aunt. The clock in their kitchen made it to 1, then 2. By 3:13, an hour I recognized too well, the phone rang me awake and her voice had no sleep left in it. I told her I'd go. I didn't promise anything because promises in these hills are a kind of spell, and this was already too close to saying a name aloud in the wrong room. The road to the overlook is a rib the mountain broke and never set right. I drove it at that careful speed that looks slow on paper and feels reckless in the body. The pines leaned into my windows and the dark between them had a weight like a smothered inheritance. When I cut the engine, the silence slapped me friendlier than I deserved. The overlook is not much. A low wall of stone, a view that in daylight makes strangers cry, a trash can with a bungee cord across its mouth as if it has secrets to keep. I called once because you have to begin somewhere. Ray. The name went out like a match you lick your fingers to kill. No echo, no bird, no fox's insult. The air tasted like damp pennies and singed spruce. I opened the tailgate and strapped on my old miner's lamp. It's not fashionable. Heavy battery box. Cloth strap that holds sweat from a man who taught me to use it. But it throws honest light. And I've never liked gear that pretends to be smarter than the hand that wears it. I took my lantern too. I don't trust only one kind of fire. The path down from the overlook starts as a suggestion and becomes a decision. Granite knee-highs in the grass make cairns that no one admits to stacking. After 10 minutes, the parking lot and its comfort of other people's litter feel like a story you tell a child. The pines thicken. The ground goes soft with old needles. My lamp made a pale tunnel and my lantern widened it to a room I kept moving through. I found the first camera at a balsam where deer rubbed the velvet off. The strap was cut clean, not torn, the way a careful man takes what he means to keep. The camera itself lay face down, lens cracked in a straight line like an unbroken promise. On the ground beside it I saw 4 shallow scallops, not boot marks, not claws, as if something had pressed with the round edge of a cup. I touched one. The dirt was colder than the nearby dirt in a way that didn't make sense, the way a handprint on a table is warmer. I called again, softer, as if I meant the mountain to overhear. Ray. That's when the first light appeared. Not fire, not a headlamp. It came up from the ground like a dandelion clock and hovered at my shoulder, round and patient. It didn't shine on anything the way light should. It did not throw, it drank. When it moved closer, the bark of the balsam lost its texture. Pine needles smoothed to green floor. Even my hand forgot its small scars. I lifted the lantern between me and the light, and the lantern's glass reflected nothing but a soft, lidless white. No halo, no glare, just the suggestion of an eye whose pupil had been sewn shut. I turned the lantern down. The light followed the lantern, not me, like it wanted a conversation with the flame and not the hand that held it. Somewhere upslope, a second light drifted and a third, the way men cross a creek without speaking when the water's at their boot tops. They don't bob like will-o-wisps in stories. They keep a miner's pace, step beside step. Uncle Ray always whistled when he was alone to keep from being alone. He'd stolen a tune from a Methodist hymn and bent it toward mischief. I heard it then, faint, the sharp 2 notes he favored before the longer slide. It came from my left, low and down the slope where the laurel knits tight. I turned my lamp that way, and the beam snapped thin as cord in the presence of the borrowed light. I moved the lantern first to make a path, and the white thing leaned to taste the flame and then came along like a child bored of sulking. I told myself what old men told me. Reflections from distant towns, car headlights bouncing strange swamp gas, electrical charge. The mind will chew until it finds a bone it recognizes. But Brown Mountain has its own teeth. The lights fell in line with me without touching me, and the woods became a room with no corners. Somewhere ahead and down, the creek argued with rocks. Between my steps, another sound. A slow scrape and a delicate pour, the sound of a shovel loving a coal bank. I've heard it all my life. It turns my lungs into small rooms where dust learns to live. At the second mast tree, I found the second camera hanging by one strap as if someone had changed their mind mid-theft. The SD card slot was empty, and the hinge was wired shut with a twist of baling that had no purpose but meanness. On the bark at shoulder height, someone had pressed a thumb hard enough to leave a whorl. Not human. I don't mean monster. The ridges were too regular, a pattern with no breaks, like the print you see when light bounces off a cut pearl. I stopped and put the lantern on a rock. The three lights came closer, curious and correct. They did not push heat. They did not pull moths. They made the space between my chest and my back feel shallow. The headlamp on my brow hummed the way old batteries hum when asked to give more than they agreed to. I reached to touch the nearest orb, and hear me, I did not touch it. My hand touched the air where it had decided to be and met a coolness that felt like the inside of a well in winter. The whistle came again. Not my uncle's mouth. His habit. Someone was wearing it. It threaded my name into the tune, not the given name, the family one, and I answered, shameful as a dog, with 2 notes of the hymn he loved to steal. The lights tightened, not like a threat but like a counsel. Be smaller. I obeyed without knowing how. My shoulders tucked. My heart learned a shorter beat. Past the mast tree, the ground leveled and opened to a rag of granite with grass like old men's hair, and the sky sitting indecently close. In the middle of that bald, the lights that followed me joined a parish worth of others, some small as quail eggs, some wide as wash basins, all streaming in a line from the far ridge as if called to service. When they gathered, my headlamp went out. Not dimmed, not flickered. It died like something told it a truth. I held the lantern high and the flame tried to climb and then remembered itself. Every borrowed light turned its seam toward my little fire the way a face turns toward a voice. I saw then what the old men meant by borrow. The lights were not lights at all. They were sockets, emptinesses shaped to fit a lantern's purpose. They lived on the appetite for glow. My flame satisfied nothing. It reminded them only of what they were not. Ray, I said, because one syllable is sometimes the bravest a body can be. A figure stood at the far edge of the bald, the way you stand in a doorway when you are not sure your invitation remains. He wore my uncle's jacket, the canvas one that knows the shape of his shoulders, and his cap low the way you do when you want your eyes to feel taller. His boots were his boots. The way they took the ground could not be mistaken. But his face, God help me, had no features, only the suggestion of them. The borrowed lights were working on him the way frost works on a window, edges first, then middle. Something held his face in a place where a man's face lives, but the part of light that makes a person was on loan. You took your time, he said, and his voice came from the jacket, not his mouth. The cloth spoke. I felt sick in that quick way the body protects you. We've got to clear out, he went on with a cheer he uses when he knows bad is on the way and wants you to pretend. I think we upset a nest. A nest, I said without moving because movement felt like permission. He lifted his hand and I saw it was a glove with nothing inside, stitched into a shape by cold. The glove pointed to the line of orbs as if their procession were an ordinary hazard. They don't like the cameras, he said. Or maybe they do and they want to keep them. Either way, they took what they wanted. What did they take? I asked, though I knew. Faces, he said, and laughed low because the word embarrassed him. The sound the jacket made when it laughed broke something inside the laughter. It ended at the wrong time, like a man put his beer down before he was finished. I stepped forward 1 pace. The lights thinned to make room, not kind but orderly. My lantern held the space of a mouth in a room that didn't expect to speak. Up close, what stood where my uncle should be had all his outlines. The scar on the knuckle from a rope that burned him. The right shoulder 1/2 inch higher from a childhood fall off the hayloft. The bootlace tucked instead of tied because he hated a knot. But the skin of the face, no skin. Where nose and lips and cheek ought to argue for themselves, a blankness kept the place. And behind that blank I saw a seam, like in the orbs. A narrow line that might open if it chose. You can't stand in this long, he said, and the jacket made the syllables with good manners. It makes you forget what belongs. It's like a dry county. Takes the first drink and makes you angry at the bottle. You're coming with me, I said, because you say that to keep from saying nothing. We'll go down by the old survey line. We'll stay in trees. He shook his cap, and for a second the light that had borrowed his face let the outline of eyes show, and I saw his look, The one he gives me when I've lied to myself. You don't lead in their house, he said. You exit the way they let you exit and you say thank you. Thank you, I said, to no one, to everyone. The procession of globes tightened again, as if pleased by my manners. From the far side of the bald came a sound I hadn't heard since I was small and got lost in a hardware store. The hum of many metal things agreeing. It drew along my teeth and made fillings feel like ants. The lights rose on a little wind that wasn't wind. They lifted to shoulder height, then higher. Ray's shape lifted too, not off the ground but inside his outline, like a person getting into his own coat. I tried stepping forward again. The lantern's flame blew flat for a breath and then stood. Something big moved in the dark past the ring of globes, a bulk without edges, a darkness in the dark. The hairs on my arms bent toward it without permission. The whole bald held its air. Even the crickets decided to wait and see. I brought the good lamp, I said, foolish as a kid bringing a gift no one wanted. You always said my old battery throws straighter. Put it out, he said, oddly gentle. They'll borrow it if you don't, and you need to see with their kind to leave with anything of yours. My thumb hesitated above the lantern's wheel. When I touched it, the flame didn't die the way flame dies. It stepped away like a well-brought-up guest who knows when he's kept you too long. The dark came on easy. I braced for blindness. It didn't come. In the lack of flame, the borrowed lights did not grow brighter. They went clearer. Not light, not eyes, not souls. Sockets, fittings, empty places shaped to accept what we make when we strike a match. They weren't hungry or kind. They were correct. Walk, the jacket said. We walked. Not down. Across. The bald tilted, and the tilt kept changing, as if the mountain wanted to see which way our feet favored and then favored that way to keep us honest. The lights paced with us, 5 on my left, 3 on my right. One at my shoulder as faithful as a dog that never once lets you see his teeth. I kept my hands close because my hands wanted to reach. The emptiness where a person would have put his face kept close because it wanted, what? Not heat. Not features. Company. The kind that makes a person in the mind of another. We came to the place where you can see 3 counties if you stand on the right rock in winter. Tonight it showed me only the suggestion of hollows stacked into more hollows, and a low smear where a town keeps its lights for proof it still exists. The globes turned toward that town as if curious about how their cousins choose to live down there behind curtains. I stood too long and thought too hard about a kitchen light left on over a sink with a coffee cup in it. A small grief arrives like that. No trumpet, just a picture your chest can't hold. You were always soft for house lights, Ray's jacket said. You and my sister both. She leaves the porch on for dear like they pay the bill. She asked me to bring you home, I said, and something in me believed I still could, because a body learns what it wants, like a path learns a boot. She thinks you got turned around. I did, he said, but not the way she means. How then? He stopped. The light stopped. The dark shape behind them lifted its head, if head is the word, and the bald tilted. Ray's cap brim flipped in a wind I could not feel. Think of a mirror, he said. Think how it returns everything to you except heat. It will give you the picture. It will not keep your warmth. Brown Mountain is a mirror the size of a county that returns what we make and keeps what we are. It kept my face to pay for me seeing it see. That's a bad trade. It's the only trade. Then I'll pay, I said before I could stop myself. Take mine instead. The jacket tilted and I felt the kind of anger you get when love prefers to be stupid. Don't play at sacrifice, he said. You don't know the exchange rate. And anyway, it isn't bargaining. It's bookkeeping. We walked again. The globes thinned until only 2 kept pace. The big dark shape drifted and set down like a hayrick. The hum of metal agreed again. The hair on my arms lay flat without me telling it to. We reached a low stand of laurel and squeezed through a corridor just wide enough for a body that doesn't lie about its ribcage. On the other side, the second mast tree, then the first, then the path ghosting toward the overlook's knees. At the broken camera, Ray's jacket stopped. The 2 globes hovered on either shoulder like uncles at a funeral, who wish they knew what to say. The seam behind each whiteness pulsed once. The jacket raised its gloved hand and placed the empty palm on my chest in the old way. You're here. I'm here. Keep going. The place where a face should be leaned closer and the seam behind the blank twitched like a shut-eye dreaming. For a breath I saw a suggestion of cheekbone, the slope of a nose, and almost of a mouth. You've kept about as much as you can keep, he said. I'll walk you to the wall. That implies you're not walking past it. That implies correctly. What do I tell her? I asked. Because lying is a muscle that weakens under attention. Tell her my lamp is on, he said. She'll know what that means. We climbed the last pitch. The parking lot shined with its one yellow bulb like a tooth in a jar. The wall caught moon and shrugged. The trash can's bungee cord yawned. My truck apologized for no longer being young. At the top, the lights behind me stopped like dogs told to heel. Ray's jacket stood beside me in the ordinary glare of public safety for as long as it could stand it. A minute, maybe. In that light, his face became a worse blank because the world around it insisted on details. He turned toward the dark where the trail mouths its wordless promise. You could come, I said, useless as a weather prayer. He shook the brim and took one step down. Just one. He paused there, body aimed at away, head bent as if listening to a room below us where someone had just come in late and everyone who loved him pretended not to see. He reached up, pinched the brim of his cap like a man does on Sunday and tipped it. The seam behind the blank unstitched a finger's width. Something bright and wrong and holy looked out, and I thought if I saw any more of it I would never know my own kitchen again. Don't let them borrow you in town, he said. They prefer that. Prefer what? Borrowed light behind windows. Folks think it's theirs. He went down. The borrowed lights drifted after. The big dark bulk rose and moved with a patience that could teach a river manners. The hum of metal agreed until my teeth forgot the taste of themselves. My headlamp blinked a death it had already died. My lantern felt empty in a way that made it heavier. I stood at the wall until the night learned my shape again and grew bored of it. A car came and went. Two young people in a hurry to be bolder than they'd planned. The yellow bulb flickered and then kept its promise. I put the lantern on the wall and tried to make my hands do nothing, but they have never been good at that. I turned the wheel. The wick rose. The flame welcomed me like a dog you didn't deserve. Down the trail, in the first bend where the path pretends to be straight, something answered my little lantern with a glow that resembled a candle in a jar set on a kitchen sill. It held steady, then swayed like it was thinking about the breeze. It might have been a reflection off my own glass if my own glass had learned to want. I don't know if it was his. I took a breath I could not keep and told myself I had done the errand. Found a man, found a kind of answer. I got in the truck because you have to move when stopping becomes a kind of worship. When I turned the key, the dash clock showed 3:13 and then the truth. The engine agreed with me twice and then settled. I drove down with the lantern lit on the passenger seat because I could not stand to ask it to do more work alone. In the first switchback, the flame leaned toward the passenger door like a face watching the woods. In the second, it leaned to me, the way a child falls asleep against the adult it trusts. In the third, it stood straight and high, and the blue ring slipped up its shoulders like a collar getting ready to be fastened. I glanced at the window. In the glass, where my reflection lives when it minds its business, my features were clear as ever. Nose, mouth, the tired making a home around my eyes. But backing my face in the reflection was a second seam, a second line, a narrow stitched thing that didn't belong to me, moving ever so slightly in time with my breath, learning my rhythm. I watched it long enough to make a bad habit of watching. I kept driving. Behind me, where Brown Mountain learns the names of lights, a lamp no one bought and no one sold burned or did not burn on a cap brim I could still describe by touch. Up ahead, the valley lay down like a road. The seam in the window did not widen, not yet. They say he doesn't rush. He keeps time like a foreman counting breaths, tapping each guardrail post with the crook of his staff and waiting for engines to confess whether they intend to climb or stall. I never believed in Goatman beyond the way you believe in a neighbor's mean dog. Enough to shut the gate behind you, not enough to cross the road. But the night I drove the switchback grade to bring my cousin home from a shift he'd walked off, I learned what patience can do when it decides to wear a shape. The grade is carved into the side of Ball Ridge like someone folded the hillside into a letter and forgot to iron it back out. Trucks don't like it. Brakes call names. The white lines lean. I'd been up it 100 times and down it 100 more with hay bales or lumber or a refrigerator that liked to shift its opinion halfway through. I knew where the road narrowed into a promise and where the gravel pushed back with a hiss that meant, mind your manners. I also knew the fifth bend as the one where my father used to take his foot off the gas and let the truck decide whether we deserved to go on. Cousin Eli had called me from a borrowed phone just before midnight. He worked nights at the quarry hauling rock to the crusher. Easy work when your back is young and your mistakes haven't learned your face yet. He said there'd been a ruckus with the foreman, something to do with overtime and a lie that had worn the soles off its shoes. "Come get me," he said, and his breath sounded too close to the mouthpiece like the phone was leaning to keep him from falling. I'm walking down, but my feet forgot the half that knows how. I didn't ask questions because questions after midnight are a kind of theft. I pulled on boots and grabbed the lantern that had begun to feel like a person in the house. On the way out, I took the old shepherd's crook from the corner by the door, though I couldn't have told you why. It belonged to my great-grandfather, who used it for sheep until the sheep were gone, and then for pointing at things nobody else could see. The wood had a twist where lightning licked it sometime before I was born. The road to the grade passed the church where the porch light is never off. In the high beams, the signboard's letters scattered like pigeons and settled again into "Welcome All," with one letter crooked as if it were tired of being kind. Past the church, the road tilted. The world narrowed to 2 lanes and a guardrail that kept secrets. The first switchback received me the way a reception line receives a cousin who has been gone too long, polite, practicing forgiveness. I leaned forward without meaning to, as if my weight could count for something. On the second bend, the mist began. Not a fog rolling out of hollers. Mist that grew from the asphalt itself, a sweat brought out by the grade. It moved like breath on a mirror. If you watched, you could almost see a mouth there, forming whatever word you hoped no one would say. My headlights found the mist and made it a wall, then a curtain, then a kinder wall. I rolled the window down to listen because sometimes sound will tell you what sight refuses to confess. That's when I heard the tapping. Not fast. Not showy. A measured knock against metal. Tock, 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 with space between like a patient hand testing fence posts after frost. It came from up the grade, ahead and a little to the right where the guardrail bends away from the drop. The taps were not echo. They had a weight. They learned the shape of my jaw through the truck door and made a small bargain with my teeth. I gripped the crook without knowing I'd picked it up from the seat. "He doesn't rush," my mother used to say when the road came up in talk. "He wants you to understand who's keeping time." At the third switchback, the mist drew back to let me make a choice. The slope turned steep enough that the truck's voice lost its cheer. The taps kept on, each one exactly where a post would be if the road were countable by hands. I would have sworn I saw the rail itself lean forward before each tap, as if to meet the crook halfway. The way small children lean into a palm raised above their hair. The headlights caught a pale shape and broke on it. Not eyes. The curve of a staff raised to lay itself across my hood. I braked instinctively, not a stomp, a gratitude, and the truck came down on its suspension like a man sitting back into the chair he meant to leave a minute ago. The crook, if that's the name for it, brushed the grill with the kind of pressure you use to rebutton a shirt for the old. The mist parted enough for the rest of him to be true. He was taller than the road allowed, which meant the road got smaller to make him fit. His legs were too long but not clumsy, the way a heron steps in water that has opinions. Horns grew not up, not back, but forward, into the dark where choices live, like the handles on a wheelbarrow you regret tying to yourself. His coat, or what I'll call a coat, though it could have been air taught to remember winter, hung in a way that made you think of wool that had learned rain. He didn't have a goat's face. A goat has jokes. He didn't have a man's face. A man has expressions. He had the shape of a face, the placeholder for one, the promise the body makes to itself. I will find a way to be seen. He tapped the crook once more on the guardrail, right where it curves to discourage foolishness. The sound rung down the posts like a metal xylophone played by someone who has listened to you longer than you admit. My truck shivered as if ashamed of pretending to be brave. I set the lantern on the dash and turned down the wick until it was a thinking ember. "I'm going up to the quarry," I said, on the chance that speech was currency. My cousin called. The goat man, or the thing wearing him, tilted his head as if remembering someone else who had said the word cousin here and lived to use it again. He lifted the crook 2 fingers width and set it back down soft on the hood. The pressure through metal was not enough to bend, just enough to test whether the machine remembered it was, in the end, made to obey weight. He pushed. My truck objected the way a mule objects, with sincerity and no art. The tires found the gravel's taste. The engine found its second voice. We moved uphill an inch, then 3. He walked with me. He did not ride the crook on my hood the way teenagers ride shopping carts showing off. He laid the hook across the steel as a teacher lays a pointer on a desk, when he knows children are listening because they cannot help it. We climbed like that to the fourth switchback, me with my jaw clenched against the particular humiliation of being helped. Him with the patience of a man who knows the weight in a story matters more than the point. On the fourth bend, the mist breathed out and, in the breath, the world revealed itself as a thinner version of what it had been an hour before. Trees too narrow to house owls, gravel too few to stop a skid, stars dull like old coins. I could see the hang of the crook more clearly, the way lightning had once chewed it and been changed by the flavor. Without thinking, I lifted my own crook from the passenger seat and held it up, as if to show I knew language. The goatman turned his head toward me for the first time. The pressure on the hood did not change, but something in the air learned a new grammar and waited to see if I would misuse it. The grade steepened. My grandfather used to say you can hear a machine choose honesty. The note slides from I can to I am or else to I wish. My truck chose I am. The taps resumed at the posts. Tock, tock, tuck, and the staff on my hood kept time with them. Through the windshield beyond the lamp's ember and the twin cones of my lights, a pair of reflectors caught us and became eyes out of habit, set low where the road's ditch humbles everything. They blinked and turned away the way deer do when they've learned not to panic too early. That's enough, I said to myself. It's the kind of thing you say to keep the smaller parts of you from running. We'll make it. He stopped pushing. The truck felt it like a missing step in a dark house. The engine's voice faltered, not in weakness, but in surprise. I rolled backward an inch before my foot remembered the brake. The crook lifted and held still. The tapping on the guardrail posts resumed, but the sound had moved. Behind me now, patient as rain on a tin roof. The pressure in the cab made my ears think of storms. I set my crook across my lap and pretended I would know how to use it if something asked me to. You can ride the hood, I said to the shape beside the road, though the words felt like I'd taken a chair away from someone old without asking. Or push, he did not. He stepped into the lane, staff angled like a question mark, and the mist arranged itself so that the road narrowed again to suit him. He tapped once on my bumper and the steel returned the sound like a church bell that knows exactly how loud to be. The tapping behind grew fainter, or farther. It was hard to tell. The posts ahead hummed as if they knew which order things would happen tonight and wanted me to be grateful. I eased onto the gas. We began to climb without escort. The mist relaxed its grip on my lights. The engine found its honest note again. The fifth switchback, the one my father honored, hovered ahead, a white line drifting out of the dark like a promise of arithmetic. Turn, and then you will have turned enough. I thought of Eli waiting with a borrowed phone, his breath too close, and how tired he would be of hearing his own name used as a tool against him. At the beginning of the bend, the goat thing lifted the crook and laid it across the lane where tires would go, not blocking, measuring. I saw then that the hook of his staff and the bend of the road were made for each other, like two halves of a jaw. His crook's curve and the paint's curve agreed. He tapped the mouth of the turn. Something under the asphalt answered, not hollow, not solid, curiosity shaped like sound. All right, I said, and the sound of my voice felt brave and thin. All right. Halfway through the turn, the truck stuttered. Not the engine. The seam of time around us hiccuped and spit us out a foot behind where we had just been. The crook's tap landed on the same post twice. My hands did that little dance a driver's hands do when he refuses to be told a thing he knows. The second time, through the same inch of air, the cab smelled like old wool and damp iron, the exact scent of my great-grandfather's Sunday coat kept in a trunk that had learned to tell the truth, only when it had to. We made the bend on our second try. The road straightened into the stretch where a man can pretend he has choices. The grade leveled to a place where you can breathe without paying for it. The quarry gate showed its bar like a blame. The little office at the edge of the lot had one light on, the color of nicotine, and through its window a chair stood with its back to the door the way a chair stands when it is tired of being sat in by men who use the same lies in different sentences. I pulled off onto the gravel. The goat thing did not follow into the yard. He stopped at the last post, tapped it, and then lifted the crook as if that were all the count the night required of him. In the mirror, he made less sense than he had in front of me. A shape meant for a smaller world. Elbows tucked, horns forward, Patient as a judge who has learned to wait for the truth to arrive uninvited, I cut the engine. The silence came on like a story ending in the wrong place. Eli. I called, and the name felt cheap in the air between the gate and the office. I left the lantern in the truck because the office light promised enough, and anyway the lantern had begun to take things personally. I carried the crook because leaving it felt like telling the house I had no intention of coming back. The office door was unlocked. The light hummed in that insect register that makes you think of heat even when the room is cold. Papers lay where papers always lie in places like this. On the desk and on the floor, and on a second desk someone calls a table to avoid admitting it's needed. A thermos sat under a handwritten sign that said September, and someone had scratched always above it with the point of a key. The chair with its back to the door did not turn when I came in, which is both normal and wrong. Eli, from farther in the yard, past the piles of broken rock and the machine that floats a conveyor like a rib through the night. A whistle. 2 notes of a tune stolen from a hymn. You can convince yourself anything is fine if the right tune volunteers. I took a step toward the sound, then another. The gravel under my boot made that forgiving crunch it makes when it agrees you are trying. The crook in my hand felt heavier, and I realized I had lifted it ready without remembering doing it. The hook turned outward like a promise to say no for once in my life. When I reached the conveyor, I saw him, boyish in the way men are boyish when they are trying not to take a beating. Eli stood at the bottom of the belt with both hands flat on the metal like he was taking an oath he didn't understand. His face was turned toward me, but the light that fell from the office refused to learn it. It blurred him the way rain blurs distant animals. He said, "Thanks," in a voice that had been dragged through other shapes. "Let's go," I said. Now he didn't move. He nodded the way polite men nod when their bodies are answering a different question. "It wants to see you tap the posts," he said, and the way he'd put it into the sentence made my ribs unpopular with my lungs. "It wants to see if you can keep time." Behind us from the grade, the tapping resumed. Not at the rate of a staff checking fences, faster. Something else had taken up the crook and was practicing an argument. Talk, 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 talk. Not angry. "I'm interested," the posts answered down the hill in tidy succession, like a line of men passing stones. The sound crossed the yard with the authority of a bell that no one had rung yet. "You started it," Eli said, not accusing, just stating a weather report. "It counts more when you start it." I didn't. I stopped because lying makes a sound even to yourself. I had put my crook across my lap and pretended I spoke a language. I had asked for help without asking. I had driven the mouth of a switchback like a man tracing a letter somebody else had written. "Give me your hand," I said, firm enough to be a bridge. He didn't. The conveyor's motor clicked. Nothing else. No belt, no crush, no stench of oil getting its feelings hurt. The click came again, closer to language. Beside it, a second sound underfoot, a scrape and a lift and a pour. I had heard it on Brown Mountain. I had heard it at Coffin Creek, a shovel learning a seam by touch. The pile of gravel at my left slumped a thoughtful inch. "Don't look," I told myself, which is a way of admitting that looking has already begun. I put the crook between Eli and the sound and pulled once, twice. He came a half step like a man from a pew who hasn't decided whether the call is for him. I touched his wrist. It was warm, human, except for the place under his thumb where the pulse should declare itself. There, his skin moved under my fingers with a patience that didn't care whether I noticed. "Come on," I said, and because every tradition in me demanded it, I said our family name. I said it the way my mother would, which is to say correctly. The conveyor clicked again. The tapping out on the grade stopped all at once like a hand lifted from a table. In the breath after, something laid the crook across the hood of my truck and leaned its weight not unkindly, and the springs answered and the cab moved, and a small metal ring I keep on the mirror to remember a friend slid on its string and tapped the glass with a cheer nobody needed. The lantern flared and settled, as if a guest had stood to go and then decided to sit again until his ride arrived. Eli looked at me as if I'd said his Christian name in a way that made it a dare. "He wants to see if you can keep grade," he said, and he wasn't talking about road. He nodded toward my crook. "Bring your curve. See if it fits." Past the gate, the post waited. The bend that has always felt like the mouth of something felt more like a throat. The mist had learned my smell. The night had learned my weight. The clock in the office coughed and quit at a minute I knew too well. "Don't," I said aloud. And I didn't know whether I was, speaking to Eli or the machine or the mountain or the patient thing that had laid the staff across my truck and pushed. He stepped away from the conveyor without meaning to, or with more meaning than I could manage. He made a soft sound of protest, as if distance tugged behind his knees. The gravel at our feet arranged itself into a shape that might have been an invitation. The foreman's office light browned at the edges like toast left in too long because the kitchen door stuck. I wanted to turn. I wanted to face the road and whatever stood there with its antique courtesy and its forward-pointing horns. I wanted to lay my crook across each post and say my own time out loud until my mouth learned new math. But behind me, the shovel sound paused in the exact rhythm my grandfather used to make when he waited to hear if a boy had remembered the last rule in a list. Do not turn when the mountain calls your good name. The conveyor clicked a third time. The yard took a breath it meant to keep. And from the grade, not shouted but placed into the night like a coin on a table, a voice I recognized as my father's said my family name the way it never had in life. Rounded, softened, meant for persuasion. The tapping resumed, but now it kept time with my heart instead of my truck. I did not turn, but the crook in my hand turned, very gently toward the posts behind me, as if it had remembered a lesson I had never learned. I used to sleep through trains. When I was a boy, the Clinchfield ran like a sentence through our nights, and the house learned to sway with it so that none of us had to notice. The whistle was comfort then, a long-throated certainty that something larger than us was crossing our dark and not asking permission. When the line shut down and the rails came up and the right-of-way turned to dog fennel and sweet gum, the quiet felt mean at first, like being ignored. Later it felt like a choice we'd made. We told ourselves we liked it. I learned I had been sleeping through something else the night I drove out to the old trestle to collect a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. The call came from my cousin Lacey, who works nights at the hospital and hears things that don't make it to daylight. She said an old man, half under morphine, had turned his face to the fluorescent and asked, as polite as company, "If you see him listening at the trestle, tell him the train's due on a wrong clock." Lacey asked, "Who, sir?" But his voice had already put the morphine to bed. She wrote it down anyway and called me because my number is the one in her head when mountains move and men won't. I told her I wouldn't go. Then I put on my boots and went, because the human body is no match for a sentence that starts with, "If you see him." The trestle at Harlow Narrows is a rib cage left on the ground. The timbers are creosote black and still greasy to the touch. The creek below is quick and tired, a combination I recognize in myself on most days. The right-of-way approaches through a cut that smells like damp iron and old prayer. I parked on the 2-rut and took the lantern because it has made a habit of following me, and the shepherd's crook because I have made a habit of pretending it belongs to my hand. The dash clock said 3:13 and then hurried to 3:14 as if embarrassed to have been caught. There was no whistle. That was the first wrong thing. The second was the sound that replaced it, a vacuum where the long call should be, a pulling at the air the way a mouth pulls broth. If you've ever stood in a church when someone who can sing chooses not to, you know the feeling. Your chest expects the note anyway. It stands to meet it and is not excused. I crossed the right-of-way to the east side where the path climbs a little and gives you a better look at the trestle's belly. In the lantern light, the timbers drank up glow and returned a gluey shine. I set the lamp on a stump and the crook against my leg and put both hands on the rail that isn't there. The old iron was lifted years ago, but my fingers knew where the cold should be. They found it in the air, a remembered chill. The skin on my palms puckered, and I heard a small click inside my left ear like a door closing halfway. Don't, I told myself, because I have learned to say that when my hands begin to believe more than my head can afford. Down in the cut, something shifted, a scrape, a lift, a soft pour. The shovel cadence, but stretched, as if whatever was digging had a very long handle and a very short patience. The creek answered with a nothing sound, the kind water makes when it chooses not to report. I said my family name into the dark, not loud, the way you set a coin down and hope it proves you honest. The cut did what cuts do. It turned the sound back thinner, as if my own mouth had lied to me. I thought of Lacey's old man, eyes on the fluorescent, asking only that I tell someone who listens to a thing that does not warn. Lights showed that were not mine, not brown mountains' borrowed sockets, but small flat shines in the timbers where nails once were. They winked in a slow procession like eyes under lids, opening by order, closing by rank. I counted without meaning to, 1 to 7 and back again. The seventh held longer and then gave up its light in a sigh I felt in the crook against my leg. When the train came, it came like a memory you've been told too many times to trust. No rails, no whistle. Just the push of air and the heavy, polite growth of shadow as it took the right-of-way and made it its own. I didn't see an engine. I saw the suggestion of squared shoulders where a headlamp would make a face if it belonged to a world that admitted to faces. Where a number should have been, there was a blank circle the color of old bone. It slid but did not slide, as if the earth moved under it to spare us both the trouble. The lantern flame leaned not from wind, but opinion. I put my hand around the glass, and the heat made sense where almost nothing else did. The train, if trains are what you call that kind of decision, took the trestle without sound. The timbers did not groan. The bolts did not declare union. The nails opened their eyes and closed them in time with a rhythm I knew and hated. 4 soft raps, then 3, then 2. The pallbearer's cadence repurposed for a machine that pretended it did not need breath. I should have run. I should have crossed the creek and found the lower path and walked until the river made me stop. I should have done what a child would do when the world refuses to wear its usual face. Instead, I did what men do when they've been asked to deliver a message. I waited to see who the message was for. He stepped out from the tree line on the far side of the cut, carrying a lunch pail like a life jacket. He walked that slow step the mountain teaches to men who have learned that speed is a kind of lie. He did not look at me. He looked at the place where a rail should be and nodded to it the way a polite man nods to a hostess. His cap brim was low, but I saw his chin by habit and knew it was my neighbor Doss, who owns 3 chainsaws and does not trust any of them. "Evenin'," he said to the train. Not to me, not to the dark. The word had dents in it. "Doss," I said, and the name made his cap twitch, but he did not look. "You hear it?" "Ain't nothing to hear," he said in that tone mountain men use when a truth cuts them and they don't want the cut to be noticed. "You feel it?" He put the lunch pail on the trestle, careful, like an offering. "My daddy said it runs when it has a cargo you'll be shamed not to help with." "What cargo?" "Faces," he said. "The way you'd answer Cole if it were 40 years ago. Or maybe the part of a face that knows it belongs to a name." He tipped his hat toward my lantern. "You carrying fire or company?" "Both," I said, and he made the smallest sound a man can make when he is glad someone remembered their manners. The train reached us, 2 men and a lantern, at the east abutment. I could put my hand out and touch what wasn't there. The lack of whistle was a presence strong enough to bend grass. The lunch pail rattled once as if a coin inside had decided to change pockets. "Due on a wrong clock," I said, because quotes sometimes pass for wisdom. "Been wrong since they lifted the rails," Doss said. "You can tell time by a thing long after you lose the thing." He put his hand over the pail and held it down. "He'll want this," he added, and then he looked at me, first time, and his eyes were as exact as the widow's. "You shouldn't be on the timber when he chooses." "Who?" "The brakeman," he said, and I felt my spine perform a small embarrassing trick. "He ain't got a whistle." "He don't need one." "He's got his hand. When he puts it up, your mouth will open." He wiggled his fingers in the air without joy. "You ever try not to yawn when you see a yawn like that? Except it ain't a yawn he's asking for." The train slowed without slowing. The absence in the headlamp widened like a pupil offended by light. Someone stood on the rear footplate of a car that had no number. I say someone because that is easier than saying a posture, the angle of a man who has thrown his weight into other men's mistakes for a living. He raised his hand without urgency, palm toward us, and the night made a sound like a drawer closing. My jaw loosened by reflex. Doss bowed his head as if to push his mouth shut with his stare. "Don't," he said, his voice small now, less for me than for his own teeth. "Don't give him your O. I didn't mean to, but the body is a borrower, and the train had come to collect." My lips rounded. My tongue found a hollow. The lantern's flame leaned forward as if to help. I turned my head away and said my family name like a bridle. The sound broke in half and fell in the creek. The brakeman's hand tilted a degree, the way a dog's ear tilts when it knows exactly which whistle you won't admit to hearing. I reached for the crook. My hand found it where it leaned against my leg. The wood felt like the truth does when you stop hiding from it. Heavy, used, still warm from someone who knew it better than you do. I raised it not like a weapon, more like a sign. The hook pointed toward the blank headlamp. An old reflex flickered through me from the switchback grade. the memory of being pushed up a road by a patience that wore horns. The crook didn't fit this mouth. It fit a different one. The train's absence pressed it flat. I set it down and felt foolish the way you feel when you bring a joke to a funeral. Doss opened the lunch pail. Inside lay a folded bandana, a biscuit turned to stone, a pocket watch face down. He lifted the watch by its chain and the train leaned toward it gently, like a man smelling a stew to be polite. Doss turned the watch over and I saw why it had been face down. The crystal was gone. Where the hands should be, only a thin seam remained, as if time had closed its mouth. The watch ticked anyway, not with the tick of springs, with the tick of a nail backing out of wood. Slow, patient, correct. "This is his pay," Doss said. He reached his hand out into the wrong wind and set the watch where a coupler would skin his knuckles if the world admitted to couplers. His fingers came back with creosote and a small slice across the pad of his thumb. He did not flinch. "He'll take it and he'll take what he wants with it," he added. "You don't have to help, but it goes worse if you stand like furniture." "What does he want?" Doss looked at my face and then passed it to the lantern glass where my face kept a reflection ready to argue with me. "He wants the part that opens," he said, kind as a doctor. "Theo." His mouth showed me for a breath the shape he meant. Then he shut his lips hard enough that I heard a click. The brakeman's hand rose a little higher. The car's footplate had no bolts, no edge, just a suggestion of iron, and he balanced on it with the calm of a man who had stopped believing in height. Something in the cut behind us laid down a knuckle 4 times, then 3, then 2, and the trestle timbers blinked the old blink with their nail eyes. "Due on a wrong clock," I said again, and the sentence felt less like news now and more like instructions. The lantern's flame shortened to a bead, then drew itself long as if showing me how to behave. I turned my head as a child turns from a spoon, and found the far bank where a white pine holds a scar from a lightning fork. I fixed my gaze where bark remembers fire. I put my tongue on my palate and pressed until the urge to shape around was replaced by the ache that says you have chosen a smaller pain. The brakeman lowered his hand. Something at the back of the car shifted. A shadow within a shadow. I heard a soft chorus from the creek. Not frogs, not stones, not water. The sound a person makes in a church when they agree without admitting it to themselves. He reached then, not for me, for the lunch pail. The chain of the watch lifted as if it had forgotten gravity. The watch did not tick faster. It ticked more certain. The seam where the hands ought to be pressed itself open the width of a hair. I felt the opening in the bridge of my nose and the hinge of my jaw and the old place inside my chest, where words settle before they pick a direction. Doss held his mouth in a straight line like a plum stick. His thumb bled and he let it on purpose the way men of his age believe blood should earn its keep. The brakeman turned his knot face toward Doss and then toward me. I saw then for a breath the dull suggestion of features, mouth, cheek, a nose like the one my uncle broke and never fixed. The suggestion slid away, not ashamed, just finished. The hand rose again, palm toward us, a teacher's patience. I leaned away from it and spoke through my teeth. "Widow." It is a word I have had to teach my mouth to carry. It came out like a coin I did not want to spend. The brakeman's hand paused. The watch ticked once in a tone I had never heard from a watch. Doss said the word too, not like me, but as if he had been keeping it warm for years. The trestle timbers blinked in a new order. 2, 3, 4. Not cadence now. Reverse. Uncounting. "That's it," Doss said, and the relief in his voice made the hair at my neck lay down. "What did we just do?" "Paid a different way," he said. "They prefer men's mouths, but they'll take a title if you give it correctly. We didn't offer it. We held it up to see if the knight would accept an exchange." The brakeman closed his hand a fraction. He turned, not gracefully, not clumsy, absent a manner of any kind, and the car moved. No screech, no release. The air made room and then forgot it had. The uncounting in the timbers stopped. The nails closed all their eyes at once. The lunch pail sat where it had sat, empty now in the way of a mouth that has decided to stay closed. The train went on across the trestle and along the bed that doesn't exist in the direction of a town that believes in sleep. Doss and I stood and watched nothing take shape out of its passing. The lantern's flame stood as tall as a song. The crook against my leg remembered how to be a stick. "Who told you to bring that?" Doss asked, nodding at the crook. "He don't answer to that curve." "I'm learning," I said, which is the most honest thing I know how to say after midnight. He picked up the pail and closed it with both hands, as if noise might wake a child. "You ought to be home when the clock trips," he said. "If it catches you away, it keeps the part of you that looks back through the windows. What time?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. In the house of my head, the hallway clock coughed and the number arranged itself behind my eyes. I took up the lantern, which had become heavier since I set it down, and crossed the right-of-way. The timber smell followed me as far as the path and then stopped like a good dog at a property line. Halfway to the truck I turned because I am not good at obeying good advice. Doss still stood at the abutment. The trestle was a rib cage in a room that had rediscovered how to be dark. Above it, the sky had the look it gets just before frost when stars seem like holes punched in tin for light that leaks from the bigger room out back. For a second my eyes made a mistake and placed a headlamp on that black car. A single bright circle pointed at me like a question. I blinked and the circle was gone. The absence of whistle came one more time. A slow vacuum that made my tongue feel larger in my mouth. Then even that courtesy ended. I drove home with the lantern on the seat and the crook on the floor between my boots. The road was ordinary. A possum shuffled like a little priest in a dirty vestment, and I left him his office. The dash clock kept decent time until my mailbox turned up in the headlights. It rolled itself over to 3:13, one last joke, and then accepted the minute that followed. I parked and put my hand on the truck roof because the metal was honest and cool and didn't ask me to decide any names. On the porch, the house breathed the way a dog does. A long, contented exhale that comes from belonging to one place for too long to bother arguing about it. I set the lantern on the railing and stood inside the doorway because doors are agreements and I like to renegotiate them in small ways. Across the room, the mantel clock lifted its voice for the hour and changed its mind twice. It settled on more than it should have and less than I needed. That was when I saw the reflection in the kitchen window. Not me, not only me. Behind my face, a round blank the color of old bone. The suggestion of a number where a headlamp isn't. The blank pressed close to the glass like a child. Everything beyond it bent and tiny. A funnel of my house shrinking to the mouth of a jar. My instinct was to open. My jaw eased on its hinge. I put my tongue to the roof of my mouth and found the hurt there and decided I deserved worse. "Widow," I said, quiet and crooked. The blank loosened. It didn't leave. It turned, as if to look down a line no town admitted to. In the mantel mirror, the crook where I'd leaned it by the door caught a seam of lamplight and made a hook of it. The porch boards made a sound like a careful step behind me. Polite, familiar, slow. I did not turn, because I have learned what that costs. I waited for the next step. And when it didn't come, I counted to 4, then 3, then 2, and the house held its breath like a creak. Somewhere in the dark between the trestle and our road, a bell that did not belong to any church rang a single wrong note, and the night accepted it as if it had been paid. A soft, dry knuckle tapped the kitchen glass from the inside. I kept my eyes on the mantel clock, which had decided to tremble rather than tell. The lantern flame leaned toward the door. The seam behind my reflection's mouth stirred, like a thread someone had held too long deciding whether to pull. And down at the Narrows, where the right-of-way has been a ruin longer than my beard has been honest, the Clinchfield was either still passing or had just begun. We followed the river's call, heard the ranger's last words, seen footprints where no one should have walked, and stood before a cabin that refuses to let go of its tenants. Alaska doesn't just hold secrets, it keeps them alive, whispering through the spruce and singing across the frozen lakes. If you're still here, your breath has matched mine, wading through each silence, feeling the cold crawl a little closer. These 5 stories aren't just memories. They're warnings. Out here, every name, every sound, every light in the distance could be the last thing you follow. As we leave the Kuskokwim tonight, keep your own name close. And if the river calls for you after this, don't answer. Some stories follow you home, and some doors should never be opened again.